In May 1940, much of Europe was already at war, but on the surface the Western Front seemed strangely quiet. After the German invasion of Poland in September 1939, Britain and France had declared war on Germany. Yet for months, almost nothing major happened in the West. This period became known as the Phony War. Behind the quiet, however, both sides were preparing for a decisive clash that would determine the fate of France, the Low Countries, and perhaps the entire course of the war. The French believed their strong fortifications, large army, and British support would be enough to blunt any German attack. The Germans, under Adolf Hitler and his generals, were planning something far more daring than a repeat of World War I. French and British strategy was largely defensive. The French High Command placed great faith in the Maginot Line, a series of powerful fortifications along the Franco-German border from Switzerland up toward Luxembourg. These concrete bunkers, artillery casemates, and underground tunnels were designed to make a direct German assault both costly and pointless. The French expected any German invasion to come, as it had in 1914, through Belgium. Their plan was to rush their best armies forward into Belgium to meet the Germans there, forming a continuous line with the Belgian army and the small but professional British Expeditionary Force. They believed that with time, their superior numbers and industrial base would grind down Germany as it had a generation earlier. German strategy turned these assumptions against the Allies. The German High Command initially considered a fairly conventional plan, but a combination of circumstances and the influence of certain officers led to what became known as the Manstein Plan. The idea was bold: lure the main Allied forces deep into Belgium with a strong German thrust in the north, while the real knockout blow came further south, through the Ardennes forest. The Ardennes was considered by the French to be poor terrain for tanks, too wooded, too hilly, and with narrow roads. As a result, they left it relatively weakly defended. The Germans decided to send their main armoured spearheads right through this supposedly unsuitable region. On May 10, 1940, the long-expected German offensive finally began. Without a formal declaration of war to Belgium and the Netherlands in advance, German forces surged across the borders, supported by the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. Paratroopers and airborne troops captured key bridges and airfields in the Netherlands and Belgium. The Dutch and Belgian armies were brave but outmatched and surprised. Civilians woke to the sounds of explosions, dive bombers, and columns of German troops advancing at high speed. A sudden blow triggered the Allied response exactly as the Germans had hoped. French and British forces implemented the Dial Plan, advancing into Belgium to create a defensive line along the Dial River, east of Brussels. The British Expeditionary Force and some of France's best-equipped divisions moved forward rapidly. On maps in Allied headquarters, this seemed sensible. They would stop the Germans in Belgium, protect French industry in the north, and avoid fighting on French soil for as long as possible. But as these armies pushed north and east, they were unknowingly walking into a trap. While the Allies were moving into Belgium, the main German armoured thrust, Army Group A, was rolling through the Ardennes, south of where the Allies expected the main blow. Moving large tank columns through the Ardennes in a short time was risky. The roads were narrow, and any serious traffic jam or successful air attack could have caused chaos. Yet German planning, strict discipline, and the lack of effective Allied airstrikes allowed the tanks to pass. Within a few days, German panzer divisions were massed on the banks of the Meuse River near the town of Sedan, facing relatively thin French defences composed largely of reserve units and troops who had not expected to face the main German attack. On May 13th, the Germans began their assault across the Meuse. The Luftwaffe mounted a ferocious bombing campaign against French positions. The deafening attacks shattered morale and disrupted communications. German infantry crossed the river in assault boats, and once bridgeheads were secured, engineers constructed bridges for tanks. The French, operating under outdated doctrine and struggling with confusion at higher command levels, reacted too slowly and too cautiously. By the evening of May 13th and into the next day, German armoured units were pouring through the gap at Sedan and fanning out into the open countryside behind the Allied lines. What followed was the heart of the German blitzkrieg approach. Rapid, deep penetrations by tanks and motorised infantry, supported by constant air attacks, aimed at encircling and paralysing the enemy rather than slowly grinding him down in trench warfare. German panzer divisions raced westward from the Meuse, toward the English Channel, cutting across the rear of the Allied armies that had advanced into Belgium. Instead of trying to destroy every enemy unit in their path, the Germans focused on speed and disruption, targeting communication centres, road junctions, and key logistical hubs. The speed and scale of the German advance created shock and confusion among French and British commanders. The French High Command, hampered by slow and rigid communications, often learned about German breakthroughs hours late. Many French generals had grown up with the experiences of World War I, emphasising methodical battle, carefully timed artillery barrages, and rigid lines of defence. Now they faced an enemy who moved much faster than their staff procedures could handle. Even when the French had excellent tanks, like the Char B1, which in some cases was superior to German tanks on a one-on-one basis, they were not used in concentrated armoured formations, but spread out among infantry units, limiting their impact. By May 20th, the leading German panzer divisions had reached the coast near Abbeville, south of the port of Boulogne. This dramatic thrust effectively cut off the British Expeditionary Force, along with several French armies and Belgian units from the rest of France. The Allied forces in Belgium and northern France were now in danger of complete encirclement. The situation was becoming desperate. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who had only recently taken office, travelled back and forth to France, meeting with French leaders and trying to assess whether the fight could still be stabilised. On the ground, exhausted Allied soldiers were retreating, often under constant air attack, struggling to form new defensive lines that were already being outflanked. Amid this crisis, the British and French focused on securing an evacuation route to Britain. The northern French port of Dunkirk became the focal point. As German armoured units pushed north and west, Allied forces withdrew in a fighting retreat, holding pockets of resistance to keep corridors open to the sea. In a controversial decision, German armour was temporarily halted near Dunkirk, partly due to concerns about overextending, the need to preserve tank strength for later operations, and a desire to let the Luftwaffe finish the job. This pause, combined with determined Allied resistance and a hasty naval effort, gave the Allies a narrow window of opportunity. The evacuation from Dunkirk, known as Operation Dynamo, began in late May. British warships, merchant vessels, and an extraordinary flotilla of small civilian boats crossed the English Channel again and again, picking up stranded soldiers from the beaches and the damaged harbour. German air attacks inflicted heavy losses and conditions were chaotic, but the operation persisted day and night. Between May 26th and early June, more than 300,000 Allied soldiers, British, French and others, were rescued from capture or death and brought to Britain. It was a remarkable feat, later remembered as the Miracle of Dunkirk. However, much of their heavy equipment, tanks, artillery, vehicles, had to be abandoned. While the evacuation from Dunkirk saved a large part of the British Expeditionary Force and many French troops, it did not alter the grim situation in France itself. The German armies regrouped and renewed their advance southward and westward into the heart of the country. French forces, exhausted, disorganised, and increasingly short of modern equipment, tried to establish new defensive positions along rivers such as the Somme and the Aisne. There were instances of brave and effective resistance, and some French units fought stubbornly, inflicting casualties and temporarily halting German units. But the overall strategic picture was bleak. The German forces retained the initiative, and the French command structure was fraying under the strain. In early June, the Germans launched a new offensive against these improvised French lines. The pattern repeated: concentrated attacks, heavy air support, rapid movements, and exploitation of any breakthrough. The French government, led by Prime Minister Paul Reynaud and facing mounting internal divisions, moved from Paris to Bordeaux as German forces closed in. On June 14th, German troops entered Paris, which had been declared an open city to avoid its destruction. Images of German soldiers marching past the Eiffel Tower became a powerful symbol of France's collapse. Political turmoil now compounded the military disaster. Reynaud, who had argued for continuing the war, resigned, and Marshal Philippe Pétain, hero of World War I, but now deeply pessimistic about France's prospects, became head of government. Pétain believed that further resistance would only bring more destruction and suffering to France. He sought an armistice with Germany. Meanwhile, in London, Churchill vowed that Britain would fight on alone if necessary, rejecting any notion of surrender. On June the 22nd, 1940, France signed an armistice with Germany in the same railway carriage at Compiègne, where Germany had signed the armistice ending World War I in 1918. Hitler's choice of location was deliberate, intended as a symbolic reversal of humiliation. Under the terms of the armistice, Germany occupied northern and western France, including the entire Atlantic coast, while the south remained under a nominally independent French government based in the town of Vichy. This Vichy regime, headed by Pétain, collaborated to varying degrees with Nazi Germany, while a minority of French leaders and soldiers chose to continue the fight from abroad. Among those who refused to accept defeat was General Charles de Gaulle. Just before the armistice, he had escaped to Britain. From London, he called on French people to continue resisting Germany, laying the foundation for the Free French forces and eventually for the internal resistance movements within occupied France. Even as the Battle of France ended in military defeat, the seeds of future resistance and liberation were being planted. The Battle of France in 1940 was one of the most consequential campaigns of the Second World War. In just 6 weeks, Germany had defeated one of the largest armies in Europe, seized control of the French coastline, and knocked a major Allied power out of the war. The reasons for this rapid collapse were complex. German operational innovation, effective use of tanks and aircraft in combined arms tactics, bold strategic planning, and the exploitation of surprise all played crucial roles. On the Allied side, rigid doctrine, slow decision-making, overconfidence in fixed defences like the Maginot Line, and the failure to anticipate a major armoured thrust through the Ardennes proved disastrous. The fall of France left Britain standing alone in Western Europe, facing the prospect of invasion and sustained air attack. It also gave Germany access to French industry, resources and ports, strengthening the German war machine. Yet, at the same time, the evacuation at Dunkirk preserved a core of experienced British and French troops, and the refusal of Britain to surrender ensured that the war would continue. The Battle of France thus marked both a shocking demonstration of German military power and the beginning of a new phase of the conflict, in which air power, sea power, and global alliances would be decisive. In the years that followed, historians, soldiers, and civilians alike tried to understand how such a rapid and overwhelming defeat had occurred. The campaign became a case study in the dangers of preparing to fight the last war instead of the next one, and in the importance of flexibility, communication, and speed in modern warfare. Above all, the Battle of France in 1940 was a human tragedy. Millions displaced, tens of thousands killed or wounded, a proud nation occupied, and an entire continent plunged deeper into the darkness of total war. Yet even in defeat, the determination of some to continue resisting sowed the hope that one day France would be free again.